Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this evening for a conversation with Vanessa Woods, who you can see on your screen right now, and Brian Hare, who's going to pop in a little bit, about their new book, Survival of the Friendliest, Understanding Our Origins and Rediscovering Our Common Humanity. My name is Talia. I'm the events manager here at Flyleaf. Before I introduce our authors, I'd love to give you all a quick overview of our virtual events coming up in the next few weeks. Next Thursday night, we're hosting UNC basketball legend Larry Miller. And the following week, we're featuring fabulous chef and author Vivian Howard for her brand new cookbook. Make sure to check out our Crowdcast profile to access our full schedule. And if you scroll down all the way, you can watch recordings of all of our past events. If you'd like to support Flyleaf and our guests, remember that Survival of the Friendliest is in stock, and we have signed book plates on the way, so those will be included. And you can order by clicking the buy button just beneath our faces, or you can call us at the store tomorrow. And we just opened for limited browsing, so 11 to 3, Tuesday through Saturday, you can come in and shop with us in person. Also, if you are inclined to donate a few dollars to the store, it helps us put on incredible programming for you. We would really appreciate that as well. All right, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our authors. So Brian, who you will see in just a bit, is a professor in the Department of Evolutionary Anthropology and the Center for Cognitive Neuroscience at Duke, where he founded the Duke Canine Cognition Center. And Vanessa Woods, who you see right here on your screen, Brian's co-author and spouse, is a research scientist at the center, as well as an award-winning journalist and the author of Bonobo Handshake. Vanessa and Brian live in North Carolina, and they are the authors of The Genius of Dogs, How Dogs Are Smarter Than You Think. We actually hosted Brian and Vanessa back in 2013 for that book, and we are so excited to host them again. Brian and Vanessa's new book, Survival of the Friendliest, interrogates the concept of evolutionary fitness as it relates to humans. For a long time, fitness has been conflated with strength and aggression, but what if that's not what made Homo sapiens so successful compared to other early humans? In a cultural and political moment that seems all about division, Brian and Vanessa's argument that friendliness is our strength provides hope for the future of humanity. A hope that we all really need right now. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Vanessa to present, and I will pop back up in a bit to moderate a Q&A. So if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of your screen or drop those in the chat, and we will try to get to all the questions at the end of the presentation. Thanks so much, Vanessa.
Thank you, Talia, and hello, everyone. Thank you so much for signing in this evening. Brian and I wish we could be there in person, and I'm sorry that Brian is not here. We actually have 2 puppies here, as well as the 4 children. As you know, we run the Duke Canine Cognition Center, and we just started the puppy kindergarten. But with campus not having its usual research program, we actually had to move the puppy kindergarten to our house. So we have 2 puppies, our staff has 2 puppies, and we're taking them into Duke for testing, so we can make sure that we minimize the people involved, because usually we have like 100 undergraduates. So this way we really need to limit the number, but he will pop in for a cameo. I'll yell at him to bring the puppies. And thank you for supporting Flyleaf Books. Brian and I are huge fans of theirs. We love the store. I've spent hours, happy hours, browsing in that store. So I never really appreciated the pleasure as much as I would now, just looking at Talia with that beautiful background behind her. You know, Brian and I feel incredibly lucky to have Flyleaf so close. We live in Chapel Hill, and I think that now more than ever, a good hard copy is like essential, because I don't know about you, but the second I'm on my phone, I am doom scrolling or emailing or trying to coordinate kids and classwork. And so, you know, the number of times I've been able to take a good book outside, and I think later on to curl up with a good book is just going to be a mental salvation. And what Brian and I have always loved about Flyleaf is that the staff is so incredible. You can literally just call them and be like, my 9-year-old has an interest in Asheville and magic, and they'll be like, oh, you should do the Serafina series, or, you know, I'm like, I'm really depressed, please suggest a book for me, and, you know, anything by Michelle Obama. So I can't thank you all enough for being here and for supporting Flyleaf Books, and just make sure that you do anything you can to bring books into your home, take some mindful moments, and then support our bookstores and our community at the same time. So with that, I am going to minimize myself because I've just noticed I've got like cardboard boxes in the background. I don't know what my Zoom room rating would be, but I'm sure it's going to be appalling. But I have a presentation for you that is going to just take you through, I guess, the key points in the book, and then, you know, Brian will pop in with a puppy or two, and we can take some questions. And of course, as Talia mentioned, we have some books plates that we can sign. I ordered them online, so they're much smaller than I imagined. So a small message we can send. All right, so let me share my screen with you. Let's see. Okay, and I think Talia is going to jump in if something goes haywire. So this is our new book, Survival of the Friendliest, and it took so long to write. We started this book back in like 2014, and we'd actually almost finished it. We had a first draft ready by 2016, and, you know, everything was looking so great. Hillary was going to be the next president, Obama was the president. And then November happened, and, you know, after a deep thought process, we thought we cannot just leave the book here. We need to expand and offer people some solutions. And really sort of, we started to realize that this perception or correction of the way we think about human nature is really never been more important than it is now. So Survival of the Fittest is actually attributed to Charles Darwin. He included it in the 5th edition of Origin of the Species, and it has been really misconstrued since then to, I guess, talk about how the weak will perish and the strong will survive. It's just informed so much, from economic policy to political movements. It is really one of those sayings that was very sticky and has enacted real world harm. Survival of the fittest was the foundation of the eugenics movement. We see it right now in COVID, when Dan Patrick was one of the Texas suggested that old people would be happy to perish for the economy. We see it in the ignoring of minorities who are being disproportionately affected by COVID. I mean, it just goes on and on. But what Charles Darwin actually meant when he talked about survival of the fittest was that fitness to biologists is only really your ability to reproduce. It was never meant to go beyond that. And Darwin, throughout his work, had all these examples. He was astounded by what he saw of cooperation and friendliness in nature. And so this is just an example of one of these sections, is for those communities which included the greatest number of the most sympathetic members would flourish best and rear the greatest number of offspring. So what do we mean by friendliness? We actually use this kind of loose definition that is a pro-social or an attraction to another individual or another someone. So just as a basic example, we see the relationship between pollinating insects and flowers. Flowers originated about 65 million years ago, and they've since become the most successful plant on Earth, based in part because of their partnerships with insects. And this was something, warthog and a mongoose. This was one of the things going around the internet. And I love this because it's actually in the wild. So the warthog rolls over and then the mongoose is like grooming him. This is just the best. And then my last example, which I think is the most emblematic of what we're talking about, is a cleaner wrasse, which is the little blue fish, and larger predatory fish. Like here you have a carnivorous eel. And so what these cleaner wrasse actually do is, instead of being afraid of predators, they're attracted to predators, and they actually swim inside the mouth and in and out of the teeth of predatory fish who are designed to eat fish their size, and to actually have their fear, their natural fear, replaced by an attraction, and to have a partnership, which they found to be, quite sophisticated. I mean, the client fish has been shown to observe the cleaner wrasse and to choose and prefer cleaner wrasse who are better at cleaning. And there's just an unspoken agreement that cleaner wrasse do not get eaten by these predatory fish. So one of my favorite creatures, as I'm sure some of you know who've heard me speak before, are bonobos. So bonobos are our closest living relative, and they only live in one country, the Democratic Republic of Congo. And the other species that I'm going to talk about tonight is our best friends, dogs. So when we think about dog domestication, one of the popular stories is that, a long time ago, humans adopted some wolf puppies, brought them back to camp, and decided that once they were tamed, they made great hunting partners, and this was how dogs became domesticated. But actually, that doesn't really make a lot of sense, because 14 to 40,000 years ago, when dogs were domesticated, we had actually killed every large carnivore of the Ice Age. We'd eliminated all the saber-toothed cats, we'd eliminated the lions, and there's some paleontologists, Steve Churchill for one, be like, Vanessa, don't say that we went around killing all the carnivores, but I mean, we definitely killed all the carnivores. I mean, look at how we behave towards large carnivores even now. All of them are threatened, most of them are endangered. So the idea that in the Pleistocene, we would have taken an Ice Age wolf, which, by the way, was so much larger and with much more intimidating fangs than the wolves we have today, and just decided to bring them home and leave them and to babysit our kids, doesn't really make any sense. So what we think happened was that, just like these cleaner wrasse, there would have been wolves in the Ice Age who had their natural fear of humans as top predators, which we were, replaced by an attraction. And one of the things that as humans we're really good at is we're really good at making a lot of garbage. And this garbage, including feces and other waste, and then just trash from the campsite, would have made an easy and very nutritious meal for wolves. So those wolves who were non-aggressive, and it would be really important that they were non-aggressive, because any sign of aggression would have led to a very quick death. Even today, if you look at the way people behave towards coyotes and mountain lions and even wolves in the wild, it's not usually a very harmonious relationship. So any wolf that showed any aggression would have been very quickly killed. And so you had this intense selection pressure for non-aggressiveness and attraction towards humans, which is basically the definition of friendliness that we're arguing for. And so when this happened, there was this intense selection pressure. What we've seen by other experiments when species have been experimentally domesticated is that when you have this super high intense selection against aggression, you get all these other changes which come about. And these include a lot of physical changes. For instance, floppy ears, curly tails, splotchy coats. And so what would have happened would be that these wolves would have very quickly started to look different from the normal population of wolves. So these friendly wolves would have started to look much like the dogs that we see today. And so once that stage one of domestication happened, then another byproduct of domestication that we've seen throughout a whole bunch of different species is that they become incredibly good at following our gestures. About basically, it's this incredible story, which I'll get into in a little bit, was that they can basically mind read. They can read your intentions, your body language. Of course, all the dog lovers out there know this already, but this was a really surprising find for science. And then once humans had realized that ability, then we could have selected on that in stage 2 of domestication, and that is the artificial domestication that led to all the dog breeds we know and love today. So let Anderson Cooper and Brian explain this a little bit better.
He's talking about what researchers call social inference, a capability humans, like Hare's son Luke, acquire around age 1. To demonstrate the concept, Hare hides a ball under one of these 2 cups.
Hey, looky guy, where is it? Can you get it? Can you get the ball?
Luke doesn't know which cup the ball is under.
Can you get it?
But when his father points, he makes an inference.
Hey, nice job.
You got it.
So what does that show you?
So when kids his age start understanding pointing, it's right when the foundations of what lead to language and culture start to develop.
Hey, it might look simple, but when Hare tried the same test with bonobos, great apes he studied for more than a decade, look what happened. Bonobos, our closest genetic relatives, can't do it.
You chose the wrong one.
But Hare discovered dogs can.
You ready? All right, I'm going to hide in one of these 2 places.
This 2-year-old Labrador named Sisu has no trouble understanding the meaning of pointing.
Now, she doesn't know for sure which place you put
That's
it.
right. There's no way she could know, and I'm just going to tell her where it is. Okay, Sisu.
So that is one of the accidental byproducts of domestication, this incredible ability to read our gestures. So the experimental domesticated species that I was talking about before is a population of foxes in Siberia. It was this incredible experiment in the 50s where they took foxes that from a fox farm, and they were tame but not domesticated, and they were breeding them for their fur. And by intensely selecting these foxes for just one attribute, which was whether they would approach a human hand, very quickly you start to see these physical changes that I was talking about before. The floppy ears, the curly tails, you'll see in the middle is one that kind of looks like a Dalmatian. And then not only that, but their behavior was so different to the original foxes. They would jump in your arms and pee for joy. And not only that, but they had all these physiological changes. So they had more serotonin, they had a longer window of development, their faces changed, so they had smaller nuzzles and they were more gracile. And they also showed these cooperative community abilities that we see in dogs and young infants. So just by selecting heavily against aggression, you get this cascade of accidental changes, which, you know, can turn a fox into something that looks very much like a dog. So if this can happen artificially, then what about in some species in the wild? And then what about us? So this is something Brian and I did with Steven Spielberg, and it will just briefly introduce how natural selection could occur without human intervention. So remember that stage 1 of the wolves becoming proto-dogs. So this initial stage of domestication where there is no human interference, could it happen with a species that we've never domesticated?
Chimpanzees and bonobos are actually more closely related to us genetically than they are to gorillas. Really, genetically, they're 99% human. That then led me to wonder, are they capable of hate? Or is it how we can hate one another really special about us? Bonobos and chimpanzees are fascinating because they are very similar to one another. They have rich social relationships. They have long-term bonds with each other. They eat much of the same stuff. But what makes the two species so interesting to study is how they're different. And they're different in ways that are so fundamental to understanding ourselves.
You really can't tell the difference between chimpanzees and bonobos just by looking at them. They look almost the same. I couldn't tell a chimpanzee from a bonobo when I first started. The differences really come when you watch their behavior and see the way their societies are made up.
I think most people are more familiar with chimpanzees. They're male-dominated, and females have to endure a lot of aggression from males.
In chimpanzees, aggression is very much to establish dominance and maintain control. So if an alpha male comes in, the first thing he'll do is he'll kill all the babies.
Bonobos have none of that.
They are female dominated, and infants and babies are almost never harmed.
You guys, I could talk about bonobos forever. All right, so we wanted to see if bonobos would also have some of these cooperative communicative abilities that we did not see in chimpanzees. So what we did was we basically played a version of the dictator game. So the dictator game is like if you have $100 and there's someone in the next room who you've never seen before and you've never met, and then there's someone in another room who's like a friend of yours, who will you share that $100 with? So the surprising thing is that we would share anything at all. But we found, economists have found that, cross-culturally, humans generally share as much as half, even if that person is a stranger. But what happens when you introduce a group mate is that they will share preferentially with a group mate, because of course, if you had something to share, you'd share it with one of your friends first. So what we saw in bonobos is that they preferentially share with a stranger, and that was really amazingly crazy to us. So if you're going to talk about cooperation and friendliness, then bonobos are exhibit A. So let me just show you what that experiment looks like. So there's Saki, she's eating her breakfast, she eats a little bit, and then she opens the door with a key, and Olivia comes in and they share the food together. So that's just to show that they're having fun. But that is something that would never happen with chimpanzees. And so in bonobos, we actually see a lot of the same things that we do in the changes from wolves to dogs. We see the same changes from between chimpanzees and bonobos. So bonobos, as you saw, are just incredibly pro-social and friendly. They also have some of the physical changes. They have this kind of like depigmentation, like a little white tail tuft. They're more gracile. They have slightly smoother brow ridges. They have differences in serotonin, just like the foxes. So, I mean, we make the case that bonobos are self-domesticated. They have all the hallmarks of a domesticated species, but they were self-domesticated. So this naturally led us to another question. Well, if it could happen in bonobos, could it have happened to us? So the funny thing about humans is that we are only one species of humans, and in the 50,000 years that in the last 50,000 years, we've shared the planet with at least 4 and probably more species of humans. So on the going left to right, this is some of our family members, Homo erectus. This is Denisovan, followed by Neanderthals, and then Homo florensis. So these were all on the planet at the same time as us. So, and they were all, well, except for the Hobbit at the end, they were all big-brained and cultural. I mean, especially Neanderthals. If you were back in the Ice Age and you were wondering who was going to make it, I mean, Neanderthals were such a clear winner. They were bigger than us. They were stronger. They were hyper carnivorous. So while we were omnivorous, they hunted basically every large carnivore in the Ice Age, and mammals too. They had, we find instruments from them. We found they did burials. So I mean, if you were looking at what is it that makes us human and what is it that makes us survive, being big-brained and cultural and super predators really seems to be just a recipe for you going extinct. So what is it about us? So we argue that we are in fact self-domesticated. And let me go back to these other humans. You'll see that compared to the other humans, we have some of the behavioral markers of domestication. Our brow ridges are much smoother. Our heads are in a shape that paleoanthropologists call globular. So it kind of looks like a light bulb sticking on top of our head. And this globularization is corresponding to a change in our hormones. So you remember serotonin. Serotonin in mice causes this kind of globularization of the skull. Decrease in testosterone will reduce those brow ridges. And testosterone and serotonin, of course, all related to aggression and friendliness. So a decrease in testosterone leads to less competitive and aggressive behavior. An increase in serotonin leads to an increase in friendly behavior. So you'll see that just by looking at our skulls in the fossil record, we'll see some of the physical markers of domestication or self-domestication. And then when you look at, and then there's also some of the physiological markers. If we look at those physiological markers, they seem to indicate or point towards our behavior. And so what about the very last ability, this cooperative, communicative ability that we see in dogs and we see in the foxes and we see in the bonobos? So we would argue that we also have this special ability. And what we have that bonobos and chimpanzees, and we're arguing that other human species did not have, is that we have group identity. So in chimpanzees and bonobos, stranger is a very clear definition. It's someone from outside your territory that you don't know. And with humans, and bonobos, the same thing. So with humans, we argue that in our species and only our species, we can recognize a stranger as belonging to our group. Now, 50,000 years ago, that may have looked like a certain pattern of ochre markings, or perhaps some shells along from a coastline 100 miles away where we know the community. And today, of course, we see these markings in all sorts of ways. So every day when we get up, we adorn ourselves in ways that make us recognizable to other people as being part of our group. So this can be some kind of religious symbol like a headscarf or a crucifix. It can be a sports jersey. You can go completely nuts and paint yourself blue, and and then in this way, just by a simple marking, then or a simple gesture or a simple language or a certain accent is that all these people from different backgrounds in different walks of life can in an instant become one group. So we think that what happened was that before with other humans that, you could cooperate and exchange ideas with a few people in your group, maybe a group or two outside your boundaries. But what really happened is that after self-domestication, the increase in cooperative communicative abilities meant that suddenly we had this social network that was unparalleled. So all of a sudden, if you could recognize, an infinite number of strangers belonging to your group, then suddenly you have this incredible network to share ideas, to share technology, to share weapons, to, you know, and really this is what we see in the fossil record, is that, you know, over time, there were these glimpses of technology that we would develop and the species that would become, but they were kind of, Steve Churchill, who's in our department, he likes to talk about how they were kind of like flickering lights on and off. Whereas when we underwent this period of self-domestication, that is when we argue that these lights really started to take hold, and there was an explosion in the fossil record, both of the technology, the artifacts, and also the density of people of our species living together. Okay, so we can look at the skull shape to see some of these differences. So if you look at the archaic to modern, you'll see the brow ridges, the globular skull, and one of the hallmarks of domestication is the pigmentation, is that all domesticated animals have changes to their coat colors. So in bonobos, the pigmentation change is their pink lips. They have depigmentation on their lips and that little white juvenile tail tuft into adulthood. So what is it that we have? So we argue that we had depigmentation of our sclera, and the sclera is the whites of your eyes. So all humans across all culture, this is one trait that never varies. We all have white eyeballs. And what chimpanzees and bonobos do is they pay a metabolic cost to hide their eyes, because they don't want other individuals to know what it is they're looking at or where they're looking. But when you have these colorful irises against this stark white background, you're actually advertising where you're looking. And, you know, anyone who, anyone who's kind of like been somewhere painful with a friend can understand just how quickly it is to just communicate suffering or hilarity or just with a casual glance. And so what we think is that we think that archaic humans, Neanderthals, Homo erectus, all the other species of humans, they had eyes like a chimpanzee. And so when with modern humans, with this depigmentation, all of a sudden, this was a really clear marker that allowed us to cooperate and communicate, but also identify strangers as being part of our species, and in addition to that, with other adornments and other markers as being part of our group. Okay, so this is like amazing, and this is almost where we wrapped up with our first draft in 2016, because this explains the incredible cooperation we see in our species, but how do we explain all the cruelty and all the suffering and all the terrible things we do to each other? So one of the hormones that we really think changes with self-domestication is a hormone that is linked very strongly to serotonin and testosterone, which I already talked about. And these three are kind of like a triptych. They tend to interact and affect one another. So we think that there was a really high increase in oxytocin in our species around domestication. And we call, like, oxytocin is sometimes called like the love hormone or the cuddle chemical, because it's what a mother feels for her newborn to elicit care. But we prefer to call it the mama bear hormone, because when is a mother bear the most loving, the most kind, the most gentle? It is when she is with her cubs. But when is she also the most dangerous? It is when, Brian put this slide in there, this is him in front of a mama bear to illustrate the point. Is that she is the most dangerous and the most ruthless when she is protecting her cubs. So we think that an increase in oxytocin allowed us to love and care for groups, for group members or in-group strangers in a way that also made us extremely protective and defensive of them, that would escalate very quickly when anyone else was threatening them harm. So just to illustrate this point, this is part of the research of Noor Tiley what we were interested in was dehumanization. So this was part of a study that is given to lots of different people cross-culturally, and this is this line basically showing the ascent of man. Of course, this is not correct, but this is really how people think of evolution. But the question was, using the sliders, indicate how evolved you considered each of the following individuals or groups. And then you'll see these different nationalities down here, religions with Muslims. So obviously the answer is that everybody is fully human. All those groups are 100% human. There are no groups who are not human. So that is the correct answer, and one you would think everyone would answer, but the answer you get is something like along these lines. And where the yellow dots are vary depending on which group you're asking, but I mean, some of them are just frightening, between Americans and Muslims, but also cultures we don't think about a lot, like the Hungarians and the Roma. I think in that study, the Hungarians had rated the Roma, which are these intensely persecuted group from Europe. They're also known as gypsies. They were somewhere like towards an Australopithecine. So when we talk about dehumanization, we are literally talking about the removal of someone's humanity, that you don't even consider them fully human. And that is what we think is a byproduct of oxytocin. Oh, yeah, that's just to show that there are different groups rate other groups in different ways. To illustrate this point, we looked at democide and genocide. And democide is basically the mass killing of a people as sanctioned by the government. So this, at the time we were writing, we looked at the last 200 years. And after World War II, there was a lot of talk about culture, and it was because everyone just came out of that really shell-shocked, because it wasn't just the Germans and the Nazis, it was the mass slaughter of Chinese in Nanking by the Japanese, it was the slaughter, it was the rape of every woman in Berlin by the Russians. And so, there was all these social and, cultural anthropologists or social psychologists who were thinking, well, maybe it was the culture of Germans that they're particularly obedient to authority, or maybe it was the culture of the Japanese that they took the emperor's deity so seriously that when he said, yes, do what you want with the Chinese in Nanking, they really took him at their word. But what we argue is that there has been genocide and democide basically in every single continent besides Antarctica. And I know some of you are like, well, look at Canada. Canada looks great. Well, if you went back another 20 years, there was the genocide of the Native Americans in there. So even Canada, you guys, even Canada does not escape. So what we think is that this ability to dehumanize other people is really a common ability of humans. We can all dehumanize someone else. This is essentially a human characteristic. And as I said, when we were wrapping up the book in 2016, we really ended with this warning of, we know things look great, but just be careful, because everything can go dark very quickly. So we then spent the next few years trying to think of solutions, and we went so far down so many rabbit holes trying to figure out, because we're evolutionary anthropologists, like we are not social psychologists, so we really just looked at the last 100 years of research trying to figure out, well, what is it that works? What is it that allows us to short circuit our dehumanization? Because as we've seen with in-group strangers, that it's very flexible. I mean, you can register someone as an in-group stranger in the blink of an eye. You can do it after a conversation. It can happen over several weeks, but the markers that you use and the indications are basically infinite. So we were like, what is it then to defend your in-group? And when you're dehumanizing outsiders, what is it that can short circuit that? And what we found is, time and again, the most solid evidence we have is true intergroup friendships. So basically, if you become friends with someone from another group, and we're talking about true friendship here, we're talking about invite them to your wedding, go to their family's funerals, like a real friendship. This is the surest way of short-circuiting the dehumanization, not just towards them, but to their entire group. And when you do that, your group, who may have been dehumanizing that other group, just through your friendship and association, they also dehumanize that group less too. So here we have one of my favorite people ever, Mr. Rogers, and he was illustrating during the segregation, ending segregation in swimming pools. And, you know, there was a lot of hysteria around this, just black bodies. And, you know, he just did this very simple gesture to show what it was like to be friends, and that it was, you know, safe to swim together. And part of, I think what we're all struggling with now is that, yeah, that's really great, but how do we, apart from, you know, these individual connections that we make, how is it that we can, you know, extend this into larger policy? And so this is one of Brian's favorite sayings. It's e pluribus unum, and it means out of many, one. So it's kind of like, instead of having a melting pot where everyone goes different and ends up the same, it's more like a bouquet of flowers where the diversity and the differences of each individual form a more perfect group. So just quickly, this is one example of how you might see the world, and this is, you know, humans on top and more on animals on the bottom. And then the question is whether, and I know there are so many dog lovers out there, so I can't wait to hear your questions. One of the other surprising things that we found, besides the intergroup friendships and democracy, which I can talk about in a little bit, is that the way we think about animals really impacts the way we think about other people. So if you think, or if I think that, you know, there is this definite hierarchy and sea sponges are at the bottom and humans are at the top and all the animals are kind of, you know, in this pyramid scheme underneath, then you are much more likely to be able to dehumanize another group of people, because once you start thinking hierarchically, it just naturally lends itself to other categories. So the researchers found that people who think of animals as, you know, no less or no more, but as part of this ecosystem, who are able to see the, I guess, for want of a better word, the humanity, or I think the uniqueness and the gift that other animals give, are much less likely to dehumanize other people. And so, I mean, what this led us to is that, you know, well, what better animal is there than our dogs? Because anybody who owns a dog would know that they are capable of joy and love and suffering and grief. And so if you're going to talk about an interspecies friendship, like a friendship that crosses this species divide, then what better animal to do this for us, who might have, or, you know, to someone who may have a slightly, you know, a tendency to think intolerant thoughts about others, what better animal to short circuit that than our dogs? Okay, so let me stop sharing. And let's see, is Talia still there?
Yep, coming.
Okay, all right.
There we go.
Yeah, ready for questions. Let's give everyone a minute and let's see if I can get Brian in quick.
Yeah, absolutely. If anybody has any questions, just go ahead and ask them in the chat or at the question feature at the bottom of your screen, and we will get those questions answered. Excited to see the puppies.
How are we going, Talia? Is there?
We've got one question in the chat so far, and I'm sure we will get some more in a couple of minutes.
Brian is coming. Oh, and then feel free to ask all your doggy questions.
Yeah, dog questions, human questions, bonobo questions are all welcome.
Dogs are going to save the world, so how about it?
All right. So the question we have is from Chris, who says, I'd like to ask Vanessa and Brian their opinion of the theory that the early friendly wolves may have had the canine version of genetic Williams syndrome.
Oh, we love the Williams syndrome. Yes. Yes. We think that is like completely fascinating, and you can really see that in dogs. So for those who don't know, Williams syndrome in children is when they are just completely attracted to other people. They have no fear of strangers. They will walk up and approach. And some geneticists found the same gene change in dogs as they see in these children. So yes, absolutely, that is an amazing finding.
Okay, perfect. Then we have a question here from Janet, who says, curious about how you define domestication. Sorry if I missed this.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, I don't.
So domestication. Sure. Domestication is a process. It's been a very slippery definition because all domesticated animals kind of had these hodgepodge of traits. But, oh, wait a minute.
Oh, my gosh.
Domestication right here. Say hi,
Hi, Brian.
Hi, everybody.
This is Sassy. She's number one. Luke, do you want to come in and say hi? This is Luke. So the little baby that you saw in the Anderson Cooper video, this is Luke now. And then this is Sassy. Can you say hi to everyone, Luke? Hi. Sassy.
Hey.
Oh my gosh. We have another one too. We have a black one. We have 4 kids, 2 puppies, and another 4 adults. Okay.
All right, y'all enjoy.
Brian, Brian, I'll call you if anything too difficult comes up.
Good.
Yeah. Brian just had to impromptu also feed our bubble friend. So he's looking after, babysitting puppies, babysitting children, entertaining friends who are safe in our quarantine bubble and COVID tested. So,
of course. I have a quick question for you, actually. So I love the idea of introducing people to the humanity, for lack of a better word, or, you know, at least value or emotionality of other animals and other people through friendship with dogs. Is there a way that you can see that being applied out? How does that make its way into a culture? Do you get everyone a dog?
Get everyone. Apparently that's just happened. So months and thing. And then also, Talia, I'm sorry, I think I got interrupted by the puppy of the last question.
Oh yeah, sure. Explaining domestication.
Oh, okay. So domestication, it was tricky because nobody could really define it, including Darwin. Because different domesticated animals have these hodgepodge of traits. Like some would have floppy ears and some would have expanded developmental windows, but it's not like this is a syndrome. Some of them will get thinner, some of them have the physiological changes, but it wasn't across the board. And so what domestication is as defined by the Fox work, and so that's why that Fox work was so important, was because they artificially domesticated a species. And so what it is it's just this extreme selection for friendliness against aggression that then leads to these cascade of other changes. And how those other changes present in an animal is different depending on which domesticated species you're looking at, but they all have this intense reduction in aggression and even attraction towards humans, or in the case of bonobos, towards other species or their own species.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so and then your question, Talia, about how to kind of take this idea of the way we think about animals and applying that to people is that I mean, it really just happens organically. There is a caveat. So when I say that people who love dogs, these are people who love all dogs. So we've had some, and so and people have noticed this. This is not a new finding. Throughout, like, the last 100 years or so, people have like noticed that people who are kind to animals also tend to be kind to people. But the spanner in the works was always Hitler's dog. Hitler.
That's what I was thinking.
He loved. Blondie her name was Blondie, and she would travel in the train carriage with him. She was in the bunker to get saved towards the end of the war. But Blondie was not just some pound mutt. She was a purebred German Shepherd. And so what we found in our research is that people can be animal lovers, but then they just like a certain type of animal. So we all know people who are really crazy about one breed, and this breed is the best breed. All other breeds are inferior, and that's exactly what Hitler was like. The German Shepherd was the breed. It was it was the symbol of the Third Reich. It was the purest. It was it was the most Aryan. It was the most wolf-like. So people who feel that way about dogs, breeds in particular, also feel that way about people. So it's just they do love animals, but there's a hierarchy within that group of animals, and those people are actually also super intolerant towards other groups of people. So there's a kind of a difference there. Does that answer your question? But
Yeah.
Otherwise, I think that just this pandemic puppy thing is just all the shelters are empty. I think that's amazing because, as I said, like if you really truly love a dog and can expand that not just to your breeder dog, but to all dogs, then you understand that there is this whole entire species that is different from our species that can communicate so well and read your moods and interact with you in a way. I mean, there's just no choice. Like you automatically have to expand that to other groups of people. And I think that is just the gift of animal lovers is the tolerance that they bring. Because as I said, the research is that, it just takes one friendship and then they will bring this deep prejudice, beliefs back into their own community. And then they will have this ricochet effect on everyone else around them.
Right. Yeah, definitely growing up in a house of animal lovers, I can see that because if your parents are animal lovers, then you're more likely to become an animal lover as well because you grow up with it.
Yeah.
Or your friends, all of that. It applies out in such a wide range. I have a question here from Jane.
Mm-hmm.
So she asks if people already have a hierarchical perception of animals and more easily dehumanize others, is there any hope that an individual person who already has that mindset can shift?
So that is the most hopeful thing, is that all the research is that these cross-group friendships work the best. They have the most extreme effects on the most intolerant people. So people who are really high in what we call social dominance orientation, or SDO, those are the people who think really hierarchically, and they will answer questionnaires in the most frightening way. Like, yes, some people are less deserving of care. Yes, some people deserve to just be on the bottom of society. Yes, some people bring, they will literally answer questions like that. But when they form these friendships, so just a couple of examples off the top of my head, the Battle of the Bulge in World War II, where black soldiers were fighting with white soldiers. The post-World War II, when they paired black people to work with white Southern fighter pilots who tend to be the highest in SDO of almost any group of people there is. it had this, and and it wasn't just across race lines. Like there are all sorts of different studies that show. There's a study that's still going on about Palestinian and Israeli teenagers that spend 3 weeks together in Outward Bound. The effects are strongest on the most intolerant people. So, and that is the hope for human nature, is that we are so flexible.
Absolutely. That's really good to hear.
And then just one thing is that I know we're all going mental about the upcoming election, but that is something that we found through our research that I didn't really touch on, but it looks like Winston Churchill was right when he said democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. And it really is that democracy, and specifically American democracy, is the best example of any form of government that has managed to give a voice to the minority, to the powerless, whoever they are. There is so much wrong with the democracy. I mean, we can go on and on about, getting big money out of elections. But it is really that, it is just this, nobody managed a democracy before America, and I say that as an Australian who's still a Commonwealther. The American democratic system is outstanding. I think what happened was that in the 80s with the Gingrich senators, Newt Gingrich was this senator from Georgia, and the Democrats had the House and Senate for 40 years, and so he came in, and what he did was he drove a wedge between all these friendships. So, Joe Biden and John McCain, Joe Biden would talk about how he and John would sit together in debates and then hang out together, and they'd literally sit next together. And then they were told by their separate parties, not to do that anymore. And politicians aren't in Washington anymore, and they go home ostensibly to fundraiser, but Gingrich was the one that did this. They're not at the sidelines of their kids' soccer games. And for all the problems that we're talking about between Democrats and Republicans, one of the least talked about solutions or problems is the lack of friendships in Congress. I mean, they literally took out the cafe where Democrats and Republicans, they all had to go there and eat lunch, and now that just doesn't happen anymore. So I would say that there's hope for democracy, but number one, democracy requires participation. And then I think, for any kind of healing, it has to be that people from the opposite party can speak to each other, and those friendships across party lines, which are very often within the family, are going to be the most important of all. And it is important that, there's this old saying, never to talk politics at the table. And it's that is absolutely not true. You must talk about it, and you must be able to talk about it in a way that leaves room for someone else's opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what happens is the more you talk about it, the more you realize that you're actually not that different, and that you want the same things. And the Venn diagram of overlapping is just that, so finding this common ground, I think, is very important, especially now.
Mm-hmm. All right. I have another question here from Chris, which is, do you think human groups can bond together without identifying an enemy group?
Yes. It works. It seems to work better when there's an enemy group. And I have conversations with Mike Tomasello at Duke. He's a great childhood psychologist, and he would say, climate change really needs some eyeballs. If climate change,
right,
then we would all band together very quickly. And I think the same with COVID. If COVID was an outside group, and you see that with the politicizing of the Kung flu and all that kind of thing, but it seems to work better, or seems to be more evident when we're threatened. But absolutely, we do it all the time. We form friendships at the playground. We form friendships with people who are over for dinner, because it's the fact that they've been invited to the same dinner party means that you're part of their group. So absolutely not. It doesn't require threat, but the most cohesion and the most innovation does seem to occur around those circumstances, unfortunately.
It's not needed. And that's good.
Not required.
All right. And let's do one last question, and then we'll wrap up. I have a question here from Melissa, who says, can you tell us a little more about the differences between bonobos and chimpanzees? How do they resolve differences in each group, one being male-dominated and the other being female-dominated?
Well, thank you so much for that question. I really have to tell myself not to talk about bonobos. book is better than that, and I'm very pleased. So so bonobos, they are female dominated. They have these incredible friendships between the females, and something that male bonobos learn very quickly is that you might be able to overpower one female bonobo, but you can't overpower or outrun 5 of them. And so chimpanzees have a very different dominance hierarchy. They are male dominated, the females get beaten, their infants get killed. And I love chimpanzees. I helped in an orphanage. I helped raise some of the chimpanzees there, so I adore them. But bonobos are just incredibly special. And what you see in chimpanzee societies is that, much like human societies on occasion, is that they use aggression to maintain control and assert their dominance. Whereas bonobos, and sometimes, you hear that bonobos are completely peaceful. They're not completely peaceful. I mean, I have seen some bonobo females do some terrible things to males, but they use that aggression in order to maintain the peace in their society. So if a male becomes aggressive or starts beating on one of the younger females, then all the females in the group will rush together to protect her. The same for if anybody threatens a baby. Brian and I say that actually bonobos are female dominated, they're baby dominated, because if anyone even looks the wrong way at a baby, like, all the females will come, not just the mom, but all her female friends. And so, humans are a little bit of both. You see chimpanzee behavior just in classic situations like war. You see it in domestic violence, because that's one of the things that abusers do, is that they cut off all the female friendships to the person that they're abusing. They rip the phone lines out so she doesn't have any communication. So they really try and isolate the females. And then, we're also incredibly bonobos, because when we do see these really strong female friendships, it's incredibly powerful, but then also beneficial. And I will note that all the countries with female leaders are doing much better in COVID than the other ones.
Can't say I'm shocked by that. All right. Thank you so much, Vanessa. We're going to wrap up there.
Thank you for coming in. As I said, please support Flyleaf. They are an incredible part of this community. And, it's so great. You just call them and you tell them what you need and how you're feeling, and they will recommend things to you. And I think that going into the next 3 to 6 months, there will be nothing more comforting or more wonderful than a book to read that's a hard copy away from your phone.
Absolutely. I completely agree. Could not agree more. And for anybody who missed the beginning of my introduction, we are now open for limited browsing. So if you are around Tuesday through Saturday, 11 to 3, you can swing by and we will let you into the store to look at books in real life, which is an experience that many people have not had in a while. So,
and if you'd like a signed booklet, let me show you. Let me see, where are these things? So we have these small ones that I can send in. So if you like a message or you would like it dedicated to someone, you see there's like the bonobo and the dog. So just let Talia know. I can inscribe them for you, and then I will drop them off at Flyleaf, and she will stick them in your book and get it to you somehow.
Yes, absolutely. Just put it in your order comments and we will get it all sorted for you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.